Now 80-20, when this will bring in Denali, because I know she's going to want to riff on this riff, and she hasn't heard me on it yet. So this is totally Denali's improv. So I read this essay in the Washington Post by a gentleman named Aaron Blake, who I enjoy reading Aaron Blake. Aaron Blake is sort of the quintessential pollster journalist. And by that, I mean, he has a sense of what's right and wrong in the world, Denali, dear listeners, but he's always quick to say, well, what do the polls show? Because the underlying assumption is it doesn't matter if it's right or it's wrong if the people support it. In particular, he's talking about Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who was the Maryland resident that was kidnapped off the streets of Maryland and then schlepped down to a prison in El Salvador. And allegedly, he was in a gang. I say allegedly with heavily underscored allegedly, because the Trump administration, which is the one that kidnapped him, has not offered any proof whatsoever. So that's a violation of a million different like bedrock points to our Constitution. It's such an outrage. And yet, as outrageous as it is, Denali, according to Aaron Blake, it doesn't matter if most of the people support it. So I just saw this headline before he came on the show. Hundreds of scholars say U.S. is heading toward authoritarianism. It's from National Public Radio. Doesn't matter if the polls show that people support it. If the polls show that it's okay for Donald Trump to have his goons kidnap people on the streets of Maryland and send them to a prison in El Salvador without saying to them what they did wrong, where they're going, without allowing them to talk to a lawyer, without even allowing them basically to talk to their loved ones. If the polls show that the people support it, then it's okay. And Aaron Blake is not the only one raising this point. Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, I know I said I wasn't going to identify anybody, but I did identify him, is a Democrat who is staking out new territory. And he's basically saying all the things that Democrats hold near and dear to themselves don't matter, and I will abandon them immediately if the polls show me there's more to be gained from abandoning them. And his partner in crime in this is that goofy guy you elected as mayor of the city of Chicago, Chicagoans. Mayor Rahm, heck of a job in that election, Chicagoans. Sorry, dear donors, I didn't mean to go down that path. Who also says the same thing. We should abandon every principle we have. Nothing matters except the polls. Now, Aaron Blake's point is he believes the polls show that there is support for Garcia or for the cause, the notion that you should not just kidnap people off the streets. He says the polls show that most Americans agree with that. So it's okay. It's okay for Democrats to support it. But I don't know. I think we're in terrible straits, ladies and gentlemen. If this fundamental constitutional right, that, by the way, if we're denied to MAGA, if Biden was doing this to MAGA people, Joe Rogan would have had, his head would have exploded. Okay? The people who believe in liberty, Bill Maher, oh my God, he'd be outraged. That's one of Denali's favorites, Bill Maher. She's laughing. So I understand the point that Aaron Blake was making, but I find it as repugnant as, well, not as repugnant as what Donald Trump is doing, Denali. But I find it pretty repugnant. The notion that Gavin Newsom and Rahm Emanuel and now even Aaron Blake are trying to shove down our throats that nothing matters if the people like it. We should take no stands on anything. We should just let them get away with it because some poll says the public believes Trump has the right to kidnap people on the streets of Maryland and send them to El Salvador. I have a hard time with that. All right, without further ado, I'm going to ask Denali to introduce herself, and then I would love to hear her riff.
Okay, Denali, I am Denali Scoop, a friend of the Ben Joravsky Show. I guess hooded sweatshirt wearer and day drinker extraordinaire, former aldermanic candidate, independent researcher, cracking into a cold one. There's a couple things I want to say to you about this 80-20 thing. And I'm going to try to outline them and then we can go in whatever direction. But you have to let me at some point read the super unhinged text I sent you a little bit earlier in the morning to bring this all together with my pop culture theory of what's going on. I want to start with this idea that you raised. So first of all, the polls. I came up in research, including qualitative research and survey research, and you can make polls say a lot of things. So I want to kind of pause there and say, with all the information, disinformation, and the way that we structure questions, how we ask about specific individual things versus things in the abstract really change the way that people relate to them. And we have talked many times on the show about people's changing relationship with the news, with the nature of information, with sort of belief and vibes. So that's one thing about polls. The second thing about polls is that elected officials and politicians and political consultants and folks love the idea of polls because they think that there is a straight line between what the polls say and what the electorate does. And I'm just kicking off a really cool research project now about the shape of at least the Illinois electorate. But over time, the number of people who are voting, or sort of the percentage of the electorate that's actually turning up to vote, is getting smaller and smaller. And the way that campaigns work, folks are kind of competing for this center space because that's what they think they have to do. This is sort of like World War I style combat in the trenches, where we've got to get those swing voters and those undecided voters, increasingly leaving more and more of America on the sidelines, and even more and more kind of potentially voting America on the sidelines. So for me, that's just kind of a no-go. I think that we have to that's a terrible direction. And that, coupled with the tremendous amount of money in politics and money in information, just leads me to believe that there is not a direct line between what the polls say and what will happen in electoral results, nor is there a direct line in kind of how we ask a targeted marketing question versus what people say and how that reveals their true beliefs. So all of that is kind of my response to that. But the place that you made me think about wanting to go is there's this book that came out in the early 90s about marketing called Crossing the Chasm. I was kind of dipping into it recently. And it's about the diffusion of innovation model, which is, you have your innovators, your early adopters, your late adopters, and kind of your laggards. It's this bell curve about the market. And it talks about how you appeal to different segments of the population and why certain people are willing to hop on board with a new idea, and what different strategies, they call it kind of like psychodemics, I think, or whatever, just like what is the mental demographic profile of somebody who is going to potentially take the risk on a new thing, like a drastically new thing. And when I think about the really craven, callous, disgusting, and ghoulish way the kind of Gavin Newsoms and Rahm Emanuels are talking about where the Democrats should go and what the party should do, I think that they are assuming that somehow ideas like civil liberties, ideas like care and empathy and rights are new or otherwise marginal ideas. And so while I've never met Kilmar Abrego Garcia, and I don't even own a Bulls hat, I think that my connection to him and my commitment to him is the idea that he is a person who is due process. He is a person in this country, and we have laws in this country, and those allow, me to walk around and live a life and have a sense of safety. Now, for other people, if they are getting their information about him through some of these other narrative frames, they feel like the idea that this guy is just walking around, going to his job, hanging out with his family is an affront or a threat to his safety. I was listening to your show from the weekend where they were saying, trotting out someone at a press conference to say, oh, this guy's from El Salvador. Did you know that someone from El Salvador once killed another person?
Yeah.
So I really think the framing of this stuff is really important. And I've been watching a lot of people reacting in lots of different ways to the rise, or maybe not the rise, but sort of the coalescing and the increasingly apparent authoritarian, chaotic, and, really like no one at the wheel style that the last has been 90 days yet. It might be like just-ish 90 days.
Oh yeah, no, it's beyond 90. Go ahead.
And I said, it's been like an entire we didn't start the fire. And that was, bringing us from the 50s to the 90s. It has been a hell of a couple of months, right? Imagine you went on summer vacation and you came back and all of this stuff had happened. It's wild. It's wild how things happen. So anyway, I like watching people react and respond to these things, watching them change their values, change their beliefs, change their understanding of things, start to change their relationships with each other. I think this is the time when the Ben Joravsky Show is very important to folks, because I think we need to make more space to kind of unspool our worries and fears and emotions, to find some other historical and cultural touchstones, and to kind of like rewire ourselves for the moment that we're in. So that is my opening riff.